Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen, and with us for our program today, Assemblyman Bob Oakes. Bob Oakes represents the 128th Assembly District in New York State. The 128th District includes Cayuga, Oswego, and Wayne counties. We thank you folks all throughout the region for joining us for our program today. Bob Oakes, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Mike. And even the 130th Assembly District next year will still be Cayuga, Oswego, and Wayne counties. So.
Yeah. The question is, will you be representing the 130th Assembly District next
I
year?
will hope I will be, but
Beginning
that's always the voters.
Try, right?
That's always the voters' choice.
Yeah, there's that redistricting thing. There's all the numbers get changed up, and the districts change a little bit. I'm assuming while the counties are still going to be the same, and the district itself will retain, but there'll be some tweaks and some changes along the way, I'm guessing.
Actually, the district continues to be all of Wayne County, as it has been. 3 towns in Oswego County, Hannibal, Minetto, and the town of Oswego, as it has been. Northern Cayuga County has been in the district from Sterling and the Fairhaven area down to Weedsport, Port Byron, towns of Brutus and Mentz. But actually there will be 3 additional towns, the town of Montezuma, the town of Aurelius, and the town of Senate. And those are communities one, Montezuma goes along the thruway, so a lot of people are in the town of Montezuma, even if they aren't aware they are, but around, obviously, the Montezuma Wildlife Refuge area. And then the towns of Aurelius and Senate kind of surround the city of Auburn. So it's my pleasure to have represented some of that area along with Assemblyman Gary Finch, and Gary Finch will represent the city of Auburn, or the district that he's in now, and south in Cayuga County. So Cayuga County is a long county, again, upper half. I will have the opportunity of running and hopefully representing that area.
So those 3 towns are being added to the district that is currently in existence now. So they're the new kids. They're now going to get to hang out with the cool bunch. That's good. They got to appreciate that. We're going to, on this program today, talk about the discussions taking place here at the state capitol right now. We've spent a lot of time talking about the recent passage of the state budget, and then there's the question that comes after in every legislative session. Now that the budget's done, what's left to do for the legislature? And we'll be addressing that on this program as well today. But let's finish up one last piece of business on this issue of a state budget and the state's finances. We oftentimes compare how the state budgets or should budget its money with that of a household. And there's a temptation in every household to want to spend beyond its means, because you want to take that vacation that maybe you really can't afford right now, especially the way the economy's been. Many households have had to cut back on those types of extravagances. Maybe the new car gets pushed back another year or 2, or maybe it doesn't. But if it doesn't, then you've got to figure out how you're going to afford it and how you're going to pay for it, and that usually involves some kind of borrowing. Maybe it's a mortgage that's in play in many households. All sorts of different things like that. When you spoke on this year's budget as it was passing its way through the legislature, you talked about that a little bit, and you said, the state really has kind of rung up its credit card to a point where maybe it's time to say, we've reached the breaking point here, and maybe it's something we got to stop doing.
Well, under Governor Cuomo's leadership, the state over the last couple of years has done a really good job at taking what is a huge deficit and coming up short of that and reducing spending, changing structure within the budget to the point where we finished the last fiscal year with a balance. We have done this year's budget when we passed it without adding increased taxes, and still spending in an overall sense a little bit less than the year before. I think those are very positive things. Where we've fallen short is we've continued to see our debt rise a little, and we aren't really attacking root-wise. If you're going to be successful, you talked about that family. What you want to do is, in addition to finishing the year balanced and not going deeper in debt, you want to figure out a plan to try to reduce that in the long term so that you put less of a burden on your family next year and long into the future.
Because anybody who's ever done it knows that once the credit card bills pile up, you all of a sudden realize that you're paying interest, you're paying penalties if you can't afford to maintain the payments because of the interest, and it snowballs very, very quickly. Let's go to the floor of the Assembly and see some of the remarks you made about the state's debt situation and how the state's credit card has been rung up, and then we'll come back. We'll talk more about it today with Bob Oakes.
This bill will increase our overall debt well into the $50 billion. That's, by the governor's numbers, $2,979 for every man, woman, and child in New York State. We rank 5th per capita, behind only Connecticut, Massachusetts, Hawaii, and New Jersey in per capita debt. But that's only part of the story. If you combine this state-related debt, otherwise thought of as the credit card debt, along with the authority debt that we have out there, the state overall total debt is $237 or so billion, or over $12,000 per capita. We have growing debt service, I think 4% this year, growing debt authorization, and no immediate plans to reverse that trend to put us in a way where we in the state are paying down that credit card debt. And with that being the case at this time, with this bill, and even though it's a good sign that the first of many budget bills are passing across our debt, I'll be casting my vote in the negative today and encourage my colleagues to do the same.
You know, you make a good point earlier when you say that this is not the free spending New York State legislature like it used to be. We saw in the not so distant past where even though times were tough, the governor and the legislature in Albany would have double-digit budget proposals on the table for discussion, even though there'd be no reason to think that you'd be able to afford something like that. Last couple years, you noted under Governor Cuomo, there's been a change, even on the part of the legislature, to live within means. But you still got, I'll keep calling them the credit cards because it's I think a good analogy that people can understand. You've still got the debt, and now I would think the legislature and the governor should be wanting to think about how are we going to pay some of this down and do it. I mean, we're seeing at the national level that that's been going the wrong way. It's been a huge increase in the national debt over the past few years.
Well, Mike, in the comments there, as I said, the governor's numbers, and if you do the math, we have around a little under 20 million people. $2,900 for every man, woman, and child we owe. If you take a family of 4, the state has debt on that family of $12,000. Now, we spend around $6,500 in the budget on every man, woman, and child every year. So we're spending on that family for $26,000 of state money, and we're owing $12,000. Those numbers, we need to control that debt. You know, we're seeing historic lows in interest rates. So when the government's putting out the bonds and, to borrow that money, the interest that they're paying on that is modest as a percentage of that total debt. If the interest rates go up a bit, that burden on New York State taxpayers, there's going to be less. When we're spending that money over here, there's going to be more of it taken for interest and less of it to spend on schools and roads and protecting the residents of New York State. So we have critical issues. While we're in these times, even though there's still tough fiscal times, we need to have a plan And I want to see out of Governor Cuomo a realistic plan that starts to attack the debt of New York State.
Yeah, it's economics 101. If you have a lot of debt, you've got a lot of interest, and you really got to watch your interest rates, because all of a sudden the rates go up just a little bit and you owe a huge amount of debt, then you're just that much further behind the eight ball. On to our next topic today, and that is what is left for the legislature to do since the budget was done early for the first time in a very long time. What's on the table, and he had made this point at the very beginning of this legislative session, he being the Assembly Speaker, Sheldon Silver. He says he thinks this is the year that New York State needs to increase the minimum wage, and apparently that bill is going to be coming to the Assembly floor very shortly.
That is the expectation. I am the ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, where all the taxing and spending bills come to that committee. Actually, we will be having a committee meeting later today where that bill to raise the minimum wage is on the agenda. You mentioned about other, or what are the priorities for the end of session. So a number of things were passed around the state budget. A number of issues were responded to. We expanded the DNA database. The teacher evaluation issue was dealt with, a new pension system for new workers in the state. So a number of critical issues were dealt with at that point. And so there aren't a lot of what the governor would have checked off, I think, of being his priorities left for the year. So then the question is what comes out of the legislature. The minimum wage bill is something that has come before the Assembly before. It is passed there. It is not passed in the Senate. For me, looking at this, Mike, just take a couple of quick examples. If you're thinking, if you're making minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, I know you're struggling. If you're trying to pay the rent, feed your family, and do whatever, it's very difficult.
Hard. Yeah.
The question is, to raise it, will that solve your problem? Will it make it easier? Perhaps some. But we have some issues with this economy. We have a very fragile economy right now, and one with very high unemployment. Let me just give you a quick example.
And we've got a minute to go.
Youth unemployment, or youth employment issue. This summer, if you're going to hire, let's say, 5 youth, one of the problems is if we raise the minimum wage, as the Speaker would like, 17.5%, instead of hiring those 5, you're going to only be able to hire 4. A company that is expanding and wants to hire new employees, they may hire people at a lower wage to be able to pick out the ones that they want to keep as they go forward. If you only hire 4 of them instead of 5, you may be the 5th person that's not hired, that doesn't get your chance to work for that company. In the overall scheme of things, I think this is the wrong time to be pushing this. I think the economy gets hurt. I think individuals get hurt. And I'll be voting in the negative when that comes before the Assembly.
It's a good explanation, because that's the question I think a lot of people have. If you're going to raise it, it's just like $1, and those people are, how could this be such a bad thing? And you just kind of laid that out, that it's going to cause the employers who hire minimum wage workers to have to rethink how many people they're going to be hiring, that sort of thing, because they're on a very strict profit margin. That's how it works.
That's how it works.
That's how it works. Lots going on here at the state capitol. We want to thank Bob Oakes for joining us, letting us know what among the issues are being talked about right now here in Albany. We want to thank you folks as well for spending your time and joining us, and we'll hope to see you soon for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.